I will defeat you, Ganondorf, for it is I, Link, master of the Keyblade, and also of the Triforce, but you didn't know that. Hiya! Welcome to Link to the Past Top 10 Dungeons video. Let's go! This is the best Zelda costume, I did it. I did the meme. This is the best Link costume I could come up with. I might change out of it at some point because I'm going to be recording this in separate sessions. Welcome to one of those separate sessions. So I do want to make the top 10 dungeon video, but I also kind of want to go over the story really fast. If you don't really care about the story, you can skip to this time, and you can just skip over the story. But otherwise, let's get into it. So you start the game as Link and you're sleeping, and Zelda is like communicating to you through your dream telepathically. She says that Ganon is taking over the castle, and she got thrown in the dungeon, and all like the guards have been brainwashed, or they either have been brainwashed or they're just like following the rules, or they were always evil. So Link wakes up from his dream and his uncle's like, Link, peace out. I'm going to help the castle because like apparently since the entire guardsmen all died, apparently Link's uncle is the one who's going to like save. He's the only one that can defeat the Ganon and win. So you make your way to the castle, and you find like a bush, and you open up the bush, and then you go in there and you do some stuff, and you like immediately find your uncle. He's failed. He's like dying on the floor, and he's like, oh, I couldn't do it. I got 2 steps in and I died. He gives you his sword and shield, and so that's pretty cool. So eventually you get to Zelda. She's in the dungeon. She takes you to like a secret passageway behind the chair that goes through like some sewers, and then you come out to the sanctuary where you meet up with Impa, and Impa's like, yo, there's an old man who like knows some stuff about like Ganon. You gotta go find Sarasahara. And then Sarasahara, in classic RPG style, is like, oh yes, you have to go to these 3 dungeons now. So you go and you fight those 3 dungeons, and that'll get you enough power to grab the Master Sword, and then you can defeat Ganon once and for all. Yay! So you get the Master Sword, and you're like, woo, I got it. I'm gonna go do it. And then you immediately get telepathically contacted by Zelda, and she's like, yo, the sanctuary has been like invaded, which makes it a terrible sanctuary. So you go and you get there, and Zelda's already gone, and Impa dies. So you go to Hyrule Castle. You're gonna face off against Aggie, but just as you get there, he just like, I think it looks like he just kills Zelda. Like he's like, this is her final moments, and then she just is gone, and you don't see her again for most of the game. I don't even know if she comes back at the end. It really looks like she's dead. I looked it up. It's apparently she just like gets trapped in a crystal or something according to the wiki, but it kind of just looks like he kills her. And then you beat him up because he's a total pushover. You take his lunch money, and in return he takes you to the dark world where everything is fucky wucky, and coincidentally Ganon has also been trapped in the dark world for a while. So you find out that Ganon has been there long enough to like cook up this little plan to get the 7 descendants of the wise guys. And he puts them in 7 different fun little dungeons with little different enemies, and he really is just, Ganon's just having fun with it. He just themes it and puts fun like little bosses for you to fight. And Sarasara's like, okay, well, you gotta go get those 7 girls before you can fight Ganon, because you need their power to finally defeat him. And like this is where the bulk of the game kind of takes place. All the hijinks ensues with like side quests and everything. It's not covered in this video because I'm really just kind of doing a quick story. You'll see as like you watch my gameplay, I'm doing all the side quests and completing everything. It's just not, I just didn't record that. So eventually you get to Ganon's tower and you fight Aghanim again because I guess he didn't die. And then when you beat him, you unleash Ganondorf's spirit from him, I guess. And then Ganondorf like runs away and goes to a different dungeon, and then you got to go there and you have your big final battle, and Ganondorf's like, I'm gonna kill you because he's a bad guy. He just says regular old bad guy stuff. There's no big twists in this. It's like he's the bad guy, do these things, defeat bad guy. So after like a pretty decently hard battle, you eventually get him, and then when you beat him, like a door opens up, and then you go walk in there, and then there's like the Triforce looking like the Wizard of Oz, and he's like, I can grant you one wish. I don't know what the Triforce sounds like. Add some reverb to that, maybe that's what he sounds like. I can grant you one wish. And I guess Link just asks for everything to be cool again. It's not really like, he doesn't talk, so like you don't really know, but I guess Link just is like, I want everybody to be alive again, and I want all the bad guys to go away, and I want all of my friends to be good. And then Triforce is like, alright, got it. So your uncle's alive again, and like Zelda and all the maidens, the 7 maidens are all good. And then that's like a pretty quick synopsis of the story. It's like very standard Legend of Zelda story, but I felt like it was important to go through just for future purposes. Oh, well, hello. Welcome to my talking couch. This is the couch that I will use for talking. The chair over there, well, I'm not going to use that for talking. That's for shit, sure. Hey everybody, it's been a while. So, not for you, obviously, this has been a second. This has been a frame of my video. You literally just watched the story, and now we're here, and I'm going to do the list. So first, a foreword. I just want to say, bear in mind, what makes a game or a level good can vary differently from person to person. So with what I find fun, all I'm saying is, this is my opinion. This is not a jab at Nintendo. This is not a jab at your interests. I'm just voicing my opinion from how I played it. I've talked to nobody else about this game. I'm not a part of the Link to the Past community. So basically, I'm judging everything on 5 categories. Aesthetic, dungeon design, enemies, length, and the boss. I gave everything a point system. I think I'm going to abandon that for this video. Because then I have to explain why I gave something a 2 rather than a 3, and I don't want to have to do that. I'm just going to talk about my opinion, and you know, the reason I put it here is because I wanted to, and I thought that fit. So what I did was I put all of these dungeons and then all the categories, and I rated everything on a scale of 0 to 3, and I'm going to kind of abandon that for this video. So at the number 10 spot, we have Hyrule Castle 2. After getting the Master Sword, you're ready to fight Aghanim, and this requires you to go back to the castle and access a new part of the castle. Since it's just the original Hyrule Castle again, it ranks pretty low in aesthetic because it didn't really bring anything new to the table. This dungeon also serves as more of a gauntlet of difficult enemies. It's like a rite of passage to tell you, like, you're in the big leagues now. These enemies are going to be difficult from now on. The enemies were difficult, but they're also fun to fight, so they're challenging. But they're all just repeat enemies you've seen before in previous dungeons. So because this dungeon is just a sequence of rooms with hard enemies you have to fight, I give it a low score in design. For length, and it really just depends on how quickly you can get through all these people and get through the doors. The Aghanim boss battle is something to be desired. If you have the red shield, his fireballs don't do any damage to you, and his big Kamehameha can be deflected right back at him, and that's the only thing that can damage him. And he keeps using that move. He also has Force Lightning, but it's like really obvious when he's going to use it because he goes to the top middle of the screen. I didn't even lose a heart when I was fighting him originally. So his boss battle was not very good. So this is why the Hyrule Castle is at our 10th spot. So when you're nearing the end of the first half of the game, you gotta go to the Tower of Hera, and that sits on the tippy top of Death Mountain. Aesthetically, it's just like a regular dungeon, but like palette swapped to be brown. This dungeon introduces the idea that each dungeon floor is actually on top of each other. So if you fall in the holes, you follow the previous room. This is a fun concept that gets super irritating after you have to redo floors over and over. It's worth pointing out that the last 3 floors are all in the same shape, so it kind of gives the illusion that you're actually like working your way up a tower, which is pretty neat. As far as enemies go, you got these like little red and blue guys whose sole purpose is just like bounce you into holes. They die in one hit, but they can overwhelm you pretty quickly if you let them. This dungeon uses like these cute little fire-breathing dinosaurs, but they die in one hit, so they're not really a challenge, and I don't ever see them again. I wish they would have like used them in a good way. Then you got these like worm guys that are like pushovers. They're very quick though, and kind of annoying to fight. They just go in random directions, and it makes it kind of annoying. The dungeon design was pretty intuitive though. It didn't get lost at all. When I had to fight this boss the first time, I was like literally screaming at my TV. I was about to rage quit. I didn't even want to play anymore. It's just a giant like worm, and it moves around this very small platform. So if you fall off the edge of the platform, you go to the floor below, and that's pretty annoying. He also gets his health reset, so any damage you did previously, just gone, and he bounces you very far back. But if you fall in the middle hole, if you're unlucky enough, you fall back 2 floors and have to fight your way back up to go fight him again. It's just a time vampire, and I think that's the most annoying. The thing I find most annoying about some of this stuff is that like it just wastes time. It doesn't even like kill you; it just wastes your time. The way he looks is just a giant worm. Like they didn't really try. They just took one of those and they just scaled him up. So pretty low as far as design goes. At number 8, we got the Dark Palace. It's the first dungeon you go to in the Dark World, and it's located where the first dungeon in the Light World is, so it's right on top of the East Palace. Visually, it has a lot of gray tones, which kind of looks nice, but not a lot else to offer other than that as far as the aesthetics go. The enemies introduced in this palace have fun mechanics to them. There's these like little turtle guys that you can only kill if you have the hammer. When you hit them with the hammer, they flip on their backs, and then you can kill them. They also have the scariest enemies in the game, which look like this. They're called Goria. And I guess they're supposed to be like dogs, but they don't look like dogs to me. They look like lifeless nightmare demons. They completely mirror your movements, so like if you go up, they go down, and if you go left, they go right. Which makes them kind of hard to kill sometimes. The red ones will shoot a fireball at you if you make eye contact with them, which is pretty difficult. It took me a while to figure out how to kill these guys, because every time I tried to like shoot a bow at them, they would just immediately shoot a fireball at me and I'd have to dodge it. So I didn't understand how to kill them for a while. But none of the enemies in this palace like really had anything truly in common. There was no like common theme here, so I'm kind of just ranking the enemies pretty low. The design in this dungeon got me kind of confused at first. The whole thing has different levels and teleporters that you use to get around. And the teleporters seem kind of like a cop-out because they just will throw them in dead-end rooms and they'll just teleport you to another room. And it kind of makes me think, why did you not just put a door to that room instead of just teleporting you there? But as you progress through this dungeon, eventually it leads you back to the beginning of the dungeon. So I think that's pretty neat. I like when it kind of wraps in on itself. Despite me getting lost, the dungeon actually had a pretty good length overall. I think it finished up nicely. The boss of this dungeon doesn't look like he belongs in this game. He has a scary design, but he looks awesome, but he just kind of looks out of place for this. Looks like someone from Metroid. When it comes to fighting him, I thought it was kind of lacking. You're supposed to bonk him on his mask until it breaks, and then you can attack him on his actual face, but the mask hitbox is like really small, and my bonks barely bonked, even when I bonked in the right place. So, don't know about that. His attacks are like impossible to dodge because you're dealing with such a tiny confined area that you just are gonna get hit with fireballs. It's just a given. And then whenever you eventually do break his mask, he kind of goes apeshit. And it's pretty difficult. 7. Ganon's Tower. Now this is the final dungeon. This is Ganon's home turf. You would have hoped that it would be further on this list. Sadly, Ganon did not impress me. While the walls have a cool design, they just look like a normal castle wall. And as you would expect, there's a ton of statues of himself everywhere, which just isn't a good look for him. The tower doesn't introduce any new enemies to fight and just reuses the enemies and also the bosses from previous dungeons. Although I will say some of the rooms had a fun pairing of enemies that proved to be challenging. Overall, nothing new there. The design of Ganondorf's abode reminded me almost of our second visit to Hyrule Castle. A lot of disjointed rooms where you just have to survive a gauntlet until you get to the boss. I will say they did manage to combine a lot of design concepts into one dungeon, and I think it turned out well. So they did combine a lot of concepts and enemies from previous dungeons, but they also... the combination of them ended up just taking a very long time. This dungeon was pretty long. You'd expect that from the last dungeon, but it was just too long for me. When you get to the end of the tower, you fight Aghanim again. So after you beat him the first time, he seems to think that the issue was that there wasn't enough fireballs to deflect back at him. So he decides to clone himself 2 times, and thus creating more fireballs for you to be able to reflect back at him. Kind of a design flaw on his part. But so while he didn't actually like learn anything from the first battle, it is only hectic because there was so much stuff going on. The 3 of them are teleporting all over the place, and fireballs are just going everywhere. So it gets kind of hard to keep track of things. 6. Misery Mire. Misery Mire exists in the dark world where a desert exists in the light world, which is kind of a fun concept, the contrast there. It's pretty creepy outside, and it's also reflected inside. The walls are covered in green slime and what looks like windows, but they're probably jewels or something. It also has wooden bridges that go across big chasms, and that's always fun. This dungeon introduces Wizrobes, which I felt was lacking from the game, and I was wondering where they were. And then they introduced them, and they were actually pretty hard to kill. They teleport around and shoot little beams at you. The other enemy they introduced was these bomb-throwing monsters that didn't really feel like they needed to be there. Most of the enemies in this dungeon were magic-themed somehow. These guys just had bombs. The design of this dungeon overall was pretty straightforward and fun, but the thing that holds it back in this category is the mosh posh of things. They had like torch puzzles, falling floor sections, flying tiles, and conveyor belts. Usually a dungeon just kind of grabs one of these and utilizes it very well. This just kind of took a whole bunch of stuff and threw it in, and we're like, hopefully this looks good. The fact that they had so many different dungeon mechanics thrown in drug out the length of the dungeon and gave it a pretty low score for length. The boss has a really cool swamp themed design. It's like a pile of slime just on the ground with like eyeballs in it. Looks like jello with eyeballs. Really cool. I love that it looks like something that would be in a swamp. The only issue with him is that I beat him in a minute with only 1 try and I barely lost any life. I would have loved for it to like use its slime to like slow me down or like stick me to the wall or like shoot little slime blobs, but he doesn't do anything but like bounce around. The little eyes just like bounce around. 5. The Ice Palace. The Ice Palace is probably the best looking dungeon in this game, and I highly recommend visiting, but mind the terrifying skeleton statues that will come out of the walls and run at you waving their arms wildly. You can immediately tell that this is an ice palace by how it looks, and that's why I like it so much. If you saw a screenshot of the East Palace, the Dark Palace, and the Ice Palace, you would know instantly which one is the ice one. And that's what I think really separates this one aesthetically. In this dungeon, they have a lot of these little like zappy guys, little zappies, jellyfish that float around, but they've been in every dungeon up until this point. But they also had terror penguins, penguins with like giant teeth, so that's cool. And then there's the wall skeletons, and they're all pretty easy to kill and just kind of get annoying, but they are themed, so. The design of this dungeon was actually pretty confusing. There was some like multi-floor action going on with pushing a block down a hole and getting it to like land on a button, but like I didn't like understand that for a while, and so I kept having to go like back up and down, and like there was a lot of holes in the ground, and if you didn't fall into the right hole, you wouldn't be where you need to be. Like you had to fall at this exact hole in this exact square to land perfectly where you needed to be. They did add these little tongue statues, and you pull the tongue out, and then like a door will open, and I thought that was pretty neat though. Despite all the confusion with like falling through the floor, I managed to get through this with a good amount of time. Somehow they managed to pace it so that even if you took forever figuring this stuff out, it actually came out to a pretty good length. This boss is probably one of the worst bosses in this game. Essentially just exists to check if you have enough magic and a fire rod, because if you don't have enough magic, you just have to like die. You're just gonna lose the fight. You walk into the room and the boss is frozen in a block of ice, and he doesn't do anything, but like there's some ice falling around you, but it's not his fault, it's just kind of happening. And when you eventually use up all of your magic with your fire rod and you break him out, he like splits into 3 little cloud monsters, and you just kind of gotta hit them, and they don't really do much. Pretty easy boss and a little disappointing for such a cool dungeon. 4. Thieves Town. This dungeon is pretty unorthodox. It sits underneath of the town in the Dark World. The whole thing is themed to be a place where criminals like hang out and cause mischief. There's even a jail and some windows that bring in a little natural lighting, and something about the colors of this one are really nice to me. Just like the green and the gray is nice. The enemies here are mostly lizard men, a new enemy that don't really provide anything new. They just kind of walk around. I think the red ones shoot fire, but other than that, they just are like the knights. Other than those guys, they just added skeletons, slimes, and like fireworms into the mix. They did have these cute little baby lizard things, but it doesn't really redeem the rest of them. So the dungeon design is a little hard to explain. When you first come in, it's split into 4 large rooms that are all connected, but the rooms are multi-tiered. So there's a second floor and a first floor. You'll see in the video, it's hard to explain, but you'll see in this video how there's entrances to the other side, but they're underneath the second floor. You don't see them when you're walking around. You just have to, I just like randomly was like, oh, I wonder if there's a door here. Oh, there is. But that took me forever to figure out. So I didn't really like that. It wasn't very intuitive. They just kind of were like, there's hidden doors here. You don't know that, but like they're there. After I got over the obstructed doors, though, the rooms got pretty cool. There was a jail room, and then they had the game's one and only light puzzle, where you had to put a bomb on a floor, and then the light from a window would shine through that hole, and then you had to go to the floor below, put a bomb there, and then that would shine through there, and then it would shine to the bottom. Thieves Town took me a while to get through, but that's only because of the hidden doorways and me dying a lot. It actually had a pretty decent length. This boss is super unique though. So there's a girl in that jail cell and you rescue her. This boss is pretty unique. There's a girl in that jail cell. You rescue her and you bring her to where you solve the light puzzle. And when she walks into the light, she turns into a giant flying ghost devil thing. That's very, very hard to beat. It just teleports around the room very quickly. And shoots a lot of shit at you. Honestly, it's harder than Ganon. Like, it's harder than the final boss. I just like this boss because it's really different. Most of the dungeons, you just walk into the room and you fight them and then you leave. But this one, you had to like save the girl, told a little story. So that was kind of cool.
So for the last 3 dungeons, I decided that I was going to get the mic really close to my face and talk really loud so that it would be super epic, but it ended up just clipping the mic the entire time. So I'm recording this like 2 weeks later, and I'm gonna reread this so that you guys don't have your eardrums blown out. In 3rd, I got the Light World's Desert Palace. Inside the palace, the floor is covered in sand, which leads to some fun enemy mechanics and is nice theming. It's also the first dungeon to have a door that leads to the outside, which is nice world building and helps to prove that this is a real structure hidden in the sand and mountain. The enemies here in the first area are themed perfectly and mesh so well with the aesthetic. Most of the enemies spawn from the sand and look like they belong there. However, when you move into later rooms, they start using these like eye statues called Bimos, not related to the Adventure Time character, which are unkillable and can really be a pain. They also added some of the other eye statues that don't vibe well with the place. The palace's design is easy to figure out, but has a few dead ends, and you might find yourself running back and forth because you realize you need to do something on the other side of the dungeon. The dungeon's easy design comes at a cost of it being really short, though. Sadly, there's not a lot to explore in this nicely themed area. The boss for this place is actually 3 giant death worms that hop around the room, coming out of the sand and going back under. It was pretty challenging for me as it was an early game dungeon. The hardest part about them was that they chuck rocks around when they go back under the sand, but the nice thing about separate health bars for each one is that once you kill one, it frees up a lot of space and it gets easier for you. When they die, each separate part of them explodes, which is really satisfying to watch. 2. Turtle Rock. The outside of the dungeon looks like a giant turtle, hence the name, and the inside has the same look when you're inside a cave. Now, I'm not really a fan of the cave aesthetic. It's probably due to a sudden influx of Zubats every time, but either way the cave look isn't for me. I will, however, acknowledge that they did theme it differently than just a normal palace look. The rooms in this rock were very large, cavernous rooms, which I thought went well with the idea of this being a cave system. The enemies in this dungeon seem to be in short supply. The only ones to be found most of the time were these jumpy, like basketball, pokey from Mario guys, and a few of the usual enemies. The real difficulty here came from puzzles, the eye lasers, and falling into pits. As far as the design, there was this big lava room with tubes that crisscrossed the room that I had a lot of fun using. The moving platforms were also a very huge part of this dungeon. You had to have magic to create the platforms, and if you didn't have magic, you were pretty much screwed. This created some fun resource management that I didn't experience until now. There always seemed to be a magic potion laying around when I needed one, so that didn't bother me much. At one point, you could go outside and warp to the light world for some secret fairies, and I like the fact that this dungeon had the ability to warp between worlds. I thought they could have used that in other dungeons, but beating Turtle Rock felt very lethargic. It challenged me in ways that hadn't challenged me yet, and it didn't go on for too long. The boss for Turtle Rock isn't a turtle like you would expect, but is in fact a 3-headed snake turtle thing. Each head of the snake was a different color associated with a different kind of magic. Red needed to be hit with the ice rod, and blue needed to be hit with the fire rod. The middle head couldn't be damaged until both heads were defeated. The ice head shot out ice onto the ground, which made you slide and created a fun new obstacle to avoid, which wasn't used at any other point. Once both the heads were defeated, the main head starts going around the room as a snake, and I figured this would be the easy part, but it goes around really fast and it's hard to accurately hit its middle section, which is the only place where it's vulnerable. Either way, Turtle Rock forced me to manage my magic better, dialed back on the enemies for more environmental hazards and puzzles, and gave me a satisfying boss to defeat. Number 1. The Swamp Palace. In first place is the Swamp Palace, otherwise known as Shrek's summer home.
Oh, hello there!
To get into it, you need to warp to the light world, go into the dungeon entrance, and pull a switch. The switch then drains the water in the light world, but this coincidentally increases the water in the dark world, so that you can now go to the dark world and swim to the entrance. It's a little hard to explain, it's easier just to see. I love the incorporation of the light and dark world here. The inside of the dungeon has a few inches of water on the lower levels, which makes you feel like you really are in a swamp area. The walls have pipes and sewer system gates pouring in water and draining the floor, which just adds to the atmosphere. There's also a fair amount of rooms that are completely flooded where you need to swim around to get to other places. I think it encapsulates the idea of intertwining aesthetic with design and then making it feel like it exists in the world. When you first enter, you come across little water skitters that are fairly harmless. You also come across these water balls that magically manifest and get chucked at you. I don't super like these because they don't really make sense. I don't know if the water is alive or if it's like a magical defense system. Going deeper in, you find floating jellyfish enemies for the first time. They're not much of a challenge. You also find fireworms in here, and while the fireworms don't really go with the water theme, I think it contrasts enough to maybe seem believable. My personal favorite enemy are these lizard frog creatures that fall out of pipes in the walls and swim around. They don't chase you or do much other than swim around, but they're adorable. The enemies in here all have something to do with water. for the most part, and that adds to the feel. A lot of the rooms in the dungeon are long hallways that are packed with enemies and hazards. Those aren't particularly my favorite, but what the dungeon's design does have are puzzles. Basically, as you make your way to the other end of the dungeon to get a chest key, you have to solve a series of water level based puzzles that had me retracing my steps quite a few times. After unlocking that chest and getting to the next section of the dungeon, you are granted more water level puzzles. It gets kind of boring though at this point, and you might find yourself turning and going between rooms because you took the wrong door. The amount of puzzles combined with my own ineptness makes this dungeon last the perfect amount of time. It doesn't overstay its welcome when it starts to get boring with the water tricks it gives you the boss. The boss here doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You would think it would be a water-themed enemy like an octopus or a frog. You get a giant eye covered in cotton balls. The mechanic for defeating his first phase is fun to play though. Basically, you just have to pull off the little puffs and destroy them until there's none left. After that, the eye begins dropping down on you and then moving quickly around the room. Where it drops is pretty delayed from where you're standing at the time, and if you use a charge attack close to it, it's a guarantee to take damage. Hit it 3 times and it's dead.
Overall, all the dungeons were fun in their own way. They were all great to experience. The mechanics were built in the 90s, and the game came with limitations. So I understand that some of the things that maybe they wanted to implement weren't implemented. It was a lot of fun to experience, and I'm glad I had the ability to play this classic game. Don't agree with our list? Comment down below which you think is the best dungeon. And don't forget to subscribe to Millex.